All right, so I'm going to walk you through the Rise Business Assessment that we use every single day with all the clients. We use it online all the time in marketing to be able to give people quick assessments as to how their business is going. Again, Rise, resources, inspiration, systems, and engagement. We get to resources. We always ask 4 main questions. And so first question we always go into is asking them if they're using any kind of assessment tools like a predictive index or a DISC or a Kolbe or something like that. And most of the time, teams will score incredibly low on that one.
Yeah.
And the reason is most of the time, it's not something they've thought about yet. It's not something that they're really even aware of. A lot of your larger companies are very aware of an assessment tool and how they work and what they do. But a lot of times the smaller teams, it's just not something they're thinking about, which is funny because they're going to hire somebody that's going to be the biggest influence on their business.
Yeah.
I mean, if Amazon hires the wrong person, they can get over it. If a team of 5 hires the wrong person, that's 20% of their business that could be negatively impacted because of that one hire. So knowing on the front end that the person's got the drive and the cognitive ability to do the job is going to be critical to how they run their business. So super important on that front. Second thing we always ask them is we have to ask them, secondly, is if they have all of the seats in their business identified and all the key processes, who's accountable for each of those processes. And most of the times they'll answer this a little higher. They'll try to go high on it, and they'll be in the 2 or the 3. We range from 1 to 3 usually. And they'll put it 2 to 3. And most of the time it's because they don't necessarily understand yet what that means. They're not really conscious of terms like process ownership or accountability charts. When we say it, they think org chart. And they're like, well, of course, we have this marketing director, and we have that person, we have the other person. That's not at all what we're talking about. So most of the time later in the consult, we'll get there, and we'll say, hey, remember that question we asked you earlier? We're back to that one now. And wouldn't you know it, they'll be like, yeah, we don't have anything like that at all. Because it's process ownership. It's not who's sitting where, who's doing what. Super, super critical.
And this lays the foundation for when you get into systems.
Absolutely.
If this isn't established, then you get to systems and you're trying to develop these process ownership charts, these maps and organizational charts. If you don't have these things identified and defined, you can't get there and delegate them.
It's all like a puzzle. And so if you don't have the one piece, the next isn't going to make any sense. For example, if I have the right PI all figured out, here's my predictive index, and this person's a collaborator, and so they're in that role, but now I don't know what processes they're going to be doing, it's impossible for me to put the two together. And so everything you find in Rise, when we ask questions, to say it's a setup, it's a setup. It's like, do you have the PI? Yes, we have the PI. Okay, great. Do you have clear accountability for who owns each process in the business? No, we don't have that yet. Okay, that's the missing piece. And that's the layer we're going to bring in next is that process ownership part to make sure that everybody knows what they're doing.
Sure. I was watching this video today. It was this guy was speaking about how he had lost 11 employees over the course of just a few months, and his 12th was coming to him and was resigning. And he was like, name your price.
Yeah.
And it was he worked with law firms, and they had just landed the biggest sale they ever had.
Yeah.
It was like $1.3 million, this consultation with this law firm, and this lady's coming to him quitting.
Yeah.
And she's like, well, I'm actually taking a pay cut to go to my other job.
Yeah.
And so he's like, what's wrong? And she lists out all the things that PI fixes, right? And these things we're talking about. Fix is, culture's bad. People complain. I don't know what my job is. Right. We don't have core values. Right. And he's like, I had posters everywhere. That's our core values. And he's like, posters don't teach people anything.
No.
And that's the importance of these things, establishing them.
So true. Third thing we always ask is about structured ongoing training. I will tell you this. I've done 500 consults at this point. This is the one everybody scores the lowest on every time, which is wild, is that there's a structured ongoing plan for somebody from day 1 to day 30, 60, 90, and then ongoing into their job. It's incredible how little, and from an employer perspective, you don't blame them. It's a lot of work to create that training and to lay all of that out. But at the same time, what it does to employee retention is mind-blowing. I mean, this was the mistakes I made. Like when I started, I remember we opened the marketing agency. You worked there for a while. When I opened it up, I made a hire and I didn't have that. I didn't have 30, 60, 90. And so somebody was sitting there for 2 weeks. He could have probably showed a little more initiative, but whatever, but you didn't have the initiative. And so he sat there for 2 weeks and he's like, what am I supposed to be doing? And I said, I just do stuff, get stuff done. Right. And eventually it didn't work out. And it was my fault for not having that 30, 60, 90 day plan for them to walk into most of the time, a first consult, this is the quarterly commitments we're making,
Yeah.
are around ongoing training for that employee. So critical to how you run as a company. Last question we get to when we go through resources is we go into financials being organized and clean. Obviously, when we say resources, we're talking time, money, people. So that money component is, if I said, and this question I always ask every time I do a consult, if I said, I want to see a P&L, a clean P&L right now, a profit and loss statement, could you get me one? And usually they put their heads down and they're like, no, I couldn't do that. And usually we go layers deeper. We say, I need a P&L. I need a pro forma. So the next year's pro forma of what we're going to be doing. I need a variance report and I need a budget. And most of the time they're saying, what's a budget? You know, what's a variance report? And then the P&L they're aware of, they just know it's not very clean. And so all of those components missing is the blind spot for a lot of businesses.
Back on the prior point, I was reading one of Maxwell's books, John Maxwell's books today, and he said there's three things that people kind of like that you should strive for. There's survival, there's success, there's significance.
Yeah.
And like when there's not significance in the job,
right?
Like people struggle within it. You know, they come there, it's exciting, they're a new hire. The first, a couple weeks or so are great. They got lots to do, but then if there's not this like pattern laid out for them, here's what you're going to be doing beyond day 30. People struggle because maybe they're surviving, maybe they're making enough money, they're successful, but they don't feel like there's any significance in the job.
Right. I mean, I've made this point with so many business owners lately, which is they will spend immense amount of money, unlimited money on improving themselves. They'll join masterminds, they'll buy books, they'll fly places. I mean, I was with a guy recently and he said, I paid a guy $100,000 for 2 days just to sit and pick his brain. Yeah. And talked about how great of a leader that makes him and how wonderful it makes him. And then we, in the curriculum, we have a tool in there where we say, here's how you should be investing back in your team. Yeah. And I can't tell you how many times I'll pull that open and people will be like, well, I'm not really going to spend money on team development, like giving them education and providing things for them. And it's incredible to me that they'll spend so much money. What's going to end up happening is you're going to elevate as a leader and the team below you is not being financially invested in, so they can't grow. So what happens is we grow and you say, now I want to go from 10 to 100 million, but these people can't get me there. And that's not their fault. That's your fault. Your fault for not having invested back in them to get them to grow with you. And so what ends up happening is you have to bring in all new people in high level positions and hope that you can get them in your core values and hope that you can get them to buy into your culture and hope that they're going to work out, when the best employees historically in any business are ones that grew with a company. You can go look at any major Fortune 500 company, and the ones that succeed are ones where people started in the business and grew with the business. The ones that fail are the ones where they brought in some hired gun and said, hey, we need you because you're a high level person, but we didn't grow up with you. So huge point. That ongoing training piece to me is the elephant in the room in most businesses. If they would solve it, it would solve so many problems.
Is this what we call mobility of the job?
Yeah.
So we have the heart, the hand.
Right. Heart, head, hands, and feet. So when we get to the feet, that is what we're talking about with mobility. And in Rise, the questions are there to trigger to find out if that employee is even interested in that ongoing training in the first place. One of the questions we ask in there is are you willing to be a critical thinker? In other words, are you willing to solve critical problems versus just following a process? One of the questions we ask in there is, are you willing to learn new skills? If I give you a book, will you read it? Will you let me know what you learned from it? If I send you to a seminar, if I send you to a training, are you going to come back with more? And so if somebody is not willing to do that, that's fine. We have a place for you. Yeah. But we're certainly not going to keep investing based on where we'd like you to go. So that's usually that big component there. So we look at those 4 questions in resources. I got to know, whether or not, this training is in place. I got to know whether or not you have a P&L statement. I got to know whether or not there's ongoing training. I got to know whether you have an assessment tool. If I know those 4 things, then we can look and say, okay, and we score it 1 to 3 on each of those questions. So they're going to score somewhere between a 4 and a 12. Most businesses I work with, they score somewhere between 6 and 9. So they know there's room for improvement, but they still would see some positives in what they're doing. And so that's where we can look and say, here's where we're going to make some adjustments.
So on the financial side, what is a pro forma? What does it stand for? And then how do you make one, and how does that affect the financial side of the business?
Great question. So pro forma just means that here's a projections of what we see coming.
Mm-hmm.
And so what we're going to do is we're going to break it down and say, here is our expenses historically for the last 90 days, year, however far back you can go historical data wise. And we're going to say, here's January of 2024. And the pro forma says we're going to bring in X amount of revenue based on the quarterly commitments we've made, based on the goals we've set. Here's how much revenue we're going to bring in. And here are the additional expenses based on that. So then we're going to do that for the entire year, all 12 months. And we're going to say, look, here's the point we're going to hire this person. What does that do to our profit margin? Mm-hmm. And we need to bring in more revenue because we just hired a marketing director or a fractional CMO service or a something or another. Mm-hmm. Here's what that's going to do to our revenue. Here's what that's going to do to our profit margin. And we're going to map that all out for the entire year. Mm-hmm. So what it'll tell us is here's months where we're going to go down in profit margin. Here's months we're going to go up in profit margin. And we can start tracking based on that. And it just lays the whole thing out. So it's basically like a future budget. Mm-hmm. And then what we're going to do is we're going to end of the quarter, we're going to sit down and say, okay, here's the pro forma. Doesn't need any adjustments. We're going to build our budget off of that. Mm. And then we're going to take the budget and say, okay, this is what everybody can spend. We're going to get to the end of the quarter, pull the P&L down, see the budget and the P&L, and that's going to make our variance report. So the variance report is going to say, we said we'd spend $10,000 on marketing. We spent $11,000 on marketing. We're in the red on our variance report. In other words, variance report says we're $1,000 off on our marketing spend. Mm-hmm. So that's how those four pieces work together as we build a pro forma. Pro forma educates the budget. Budget educates how we actually spend. Get to the end of the quarter, the P&L tells us how we did. The variance report is the law at the end that says you broke the law. Mm. So they all work together.
So the pro forma is kind of like the vision.
That's right.
The budget is the plan, like what you're planning to do.
Right.
The P&L says you did the plan, you didn't do the plan.
Right. And the variance report just smacks you upside the head. Okay. It's just there to make you physically look and say we went over or we didn't. Sure. We didn't go over. The thing with the pro formas, I mean, we've been doing a lot of these lately, and it's kind of something we introduced to the space because a lot of your operating systems did not touch the financial piece at all. Okay. Which is really problematic when you think about it. I mean, how in the world would you even do this without knowing those numbers? So it literally, within Rise, we take this all the way from, here's your key purpose indicator at the top line, how much revenue we're going to make from each purpose that we fulfill, drive that down to profits, and then the profit, as soon as I know the profit number, the revenue and profit margin numbers, I can fill out the whole pro forma. Because I'm a real big proponent of percentage-based budgeting. I mean, we did this just a little bit ago, percentage-based budgeting, which is, I want to spend 20% of my, anywhere from 8 to 20% of my gross revenue based on to my marketing. And I'm going to spend 15 to 30% of my gross revenue towards staffing. Mm. So the pro forma gets real simple because it's just percentages. Sure. And so once it all breaks down, once it hits the bottom line, it should be somewhere between 20 and 35% profit margin to be a good, viable business. If we're in a huge growth phase, it's going to be a lot smaller. We're going to be down at, you see businesses here all the time in the tech space where it's like, hey, we're 7 years in and we're profitable. Mm. Not necessarily the wrong move. Mm. It's actually most tech businesses don't make their money until year 7 to 10. Mm. However, if you're in consumer product goods or you're in retail and you're not making money in year 1, we have a problem. And the pro forma would have told us that. It would have said, hey, we didn't hit benchmarks. We're not going to hit our percentages. We're going to have big problems along the way. So we've been doing them. I mean, I've probably done 20 of them over the last few months of just sitting there with somebody and saying, okay, how much money are we projecting to spend on toilet paper over the next 12 months? It sounds stupid, but I mean, when you start going off of everything, we take every product now with Sharper and we run a pro forma on it and say, this doesn't make any sense.
Sure.
So huge. Inspiration we go into. Inspiration talks about, we got to look first and foremost and say, do we have core values? Core values are just, and I always ask the question the same way, which is if I went around the table right now and said, tell me what the core values are, you could tell me what they are.
Let me come into that with a question.
Yeah.
So that way you kind of like.
I like it.
So when you come into inspiration, the next section, what is the importance of core values and what are they and what do they bring to a team?
Yeah. So a core value is the best way to describe it, and I'll give credit where credit's due. I've always heard Gary say this. Core values are not an I'm sorry. Core values are an I'm done. The way I describe them always to a team is here's our organizational or our process ownership chart. The core values are the guardrails on either side of it. In other words, we can change process, we can change roles, people can come and go, but the guardrails don't leave. We cannot go off the road on these things. And so we do exercises to flesh out of teams what those core values are. We've done them for years. They're honestly, I mean, I've had people break down in tears doing core value exercises. I've had people yell at each other because they disagree on what the core values are. I had one the other day where, a guy was about ready to quit because he's like, I will not sacrifice this core value. It's not coming off the board for me. And so they're really potent. Once you have them, they're the guiding rules for the entire company. You cannot violate our core values. And so they become critical. Within a team, I'm going to go around the table and I'm going to say to everybody, tell me what the core values are and tell me whether or not we work and strive and run off of them. I mean, you made a comment earlier about the same thing, which is, I walked into an office a while back and they had this big mural on their wall and said core values and had their core values on the wall. Really cool looking. I mean, they had a printer come in and do the whole thing. It was awesome. And I was like, got in the room and I'm like, great, we can save some time. We won't need to do the core values exercise. You guys have them. And he goes, no, actually, we just, the wall was empty. So I just told a printer to come put something there. And he put that up there and that's what it is. And I'm like, so that's where he's like, yeah, nobody really knows what they are even. And so we went through and did the whole exercise and they were completely wrong. That was not their core values at all. We changed them completely. But now we go back and say, okay, every quarter, here's our core values. We give you 4 of them. Here's the core values. Did we keep them or not keep them? And I've had teams where if they're very, very, they trust each other, we'll go around the table and I'll say, look, here's Dylan. Do you feel that Dylan violated any of our core values over the last 90 days? And if they feel freedom to do it, they'll look and say, yeah, I think you violated our core value of blank. We need to create a plan to get you back on track with that. We do the 9-box assessments. That's part of that, is looking at that assessment and saying high trust means that you have not violated our core values, that we trust you. And that's where that starts. And so we don't have a core values exercise on the front end. We're going to end up with some bad people. The worst employee in a business is a high performer with low trust and no core values, because you don't want to fire them because they bring in a lot of money, but nobody can stand them. I mean, I just heard a business owner, I was talking the other day talking about this, of people literally shutting their doors when people walk into the office. And I was like, that's sad. That shouldn't be that way. So core values, super important. We always start with that one. We go down the assessment. We then get into, which is we want to know from them what's their purpose. And this one always throws people off when I ask this question, because the question says, we have clearly defined and documented our purpose beyond, and it said, I did this when I made the question, which is beyond making money. I immediately lose all of them right there, because they all look at it and say, well, the purpose is here to make money. And as soon as the team member starts saying that, then you look at the owner and he'll say, no, that's not at all what this is about. If I just want to make money, I can make more money just doing this by myself than all of you. And then all of a sudden, what we get into is we create purpose statements. And we find out that his purpose actually is, I've got a guy, his purpose is the people that work there. That's it. He has no interest in this sounds terrible, the customer. He's not interested in making more money. He has plenty of money. He literally wants to have 1,000 people working with him and helping them and giving them opportunities. That's his purpose. And they didn't know that. Flesh that out. And now all of a sudden those purposes become very, very potent and palatable to them. So got to know if there's a purpose statement. Are we all there? The third question I put on there, I battled with it for a long time because I wasn't sure if it was the right question, but I feel like it's been helpful as we've done these assessments, which is, do we feel like we have a good company culture? And I always say to people, it's like, that just means like, do you feel like we got a good vibe here? Like it's a good vibe in the business. And a lot of times I always tell people this is the most subjective question in the entire assessment. It's just how you feel about it. Like, how do you feel? It's amazing to watch how many times you'll get people who the employer thinks they're on board and like they love working here, and they'll score it a 1, and they'll just kind of whiplash look at them like, why did you score that a 1? Yeah. And they'll say something like, sometimes it feels a little toxic here. Feels like things are a little bit too aggressive. It's not really what I'm looking for. And it's a very telling question. Other times you get people who just rank everything 3s and it's all good and there's no problem. So that question really kind of gets to the heart of just how do you feel about working here and what do you think's going on? The last question we always get to is, we feel that there's long-term goals that have been documented, that people have a vision for the future of where we're going, that they understand what the long-term goals of the company are. And that's kind of where we get to the end of inspiration, which is like, do we know where we're going as a company? A lot of times you get employees who they see the day they're in. And then you see department heads who see the month that they're in. And then you see owners who see 5 years down the line. And I always warn team members, which is, you're not going to get this gleeful response from an owner when you accomplish a goal. And the reason is because he already celebrated it, because he lives 5 years in advance. So when you get that big sale, when you get that historic month and he doesn't respond like you'd want him to, it's because he already experienced it when he came up with the idea. And that's tough on employees.
Yeah.
So what we have to do is look at that owner and say, I need you to explain to everybody sitting here where we're going over the next 5 years so that they can celebrate it now as well and be willing to work towards getting it done. So very important that we clarify long-term vision with people.
I think too with that, or oftentimes with like the PI assessment, these type of things, we look and we excuse our behavior because we're a certain way.
Yeah.
You know, in this case, it's like, well, the business owner's like, well, I'm not excited about this because I've already had the excitement. It's like, no, you need to be excited for your employees and with them because they're going to think you're disappointed or you're not really on board with this.
Right.
And it's not an excuse to be like, well, I already celebrated this. It's a realization that I already celebrated this, but I need to celebrate it again.
Right.
You know,
it's leadership. That's being a leader, is being able to look and say, look, this is what my team needs from me. I tell people this all the time, especially when I work with a small team, is look, we're going to show you PI and I'm going to show you that you're a maverick and you're this, that, and the other thing. But look, if there's less than 3 people in this room right now, being an entrepreneur means you're going to have to adapt.
Yeah.
You're going to have to adapt your profile to whatever the company needs in that moment. I mean, when I first took a PI, it said that I was acting like a salesperson. You know why? Because my company needed sales at the time. Had nothing to do with how I wanted to live my life. It's just the way it was. Now, if you grow, you can become more of a specialist. You can do those things, but you have to remember your team needs what they need and you have to fill that bucket. I've been saying this a lot lately, which is we need to take the process ownership chart and actually flip it upside down. Because at the end of the day, all you are is just a resource to the business. Everything flows to the, quote, visionary CEO as a resource to the company. And what that company needs a lot of times is somebody to stand there and say, hey, we just got this big sale. I mean, for me, it's just another checkbox that we're going to get our goal for the quarter. But for you, this is life and death. So very critical. So we always start the same thing with systems questions, which is we start by asking them, do they have documented processes, procedures, and policies? 9 times out of 10, when I ask that question, they don't know the distinction between process, procedure, and policy. So they usually end up ranking it higher, thinking that they have clear understanding of what that is. And then when we get to it, they're like, well, we don't have any of that.
Yeah.
So for clarity, process means we have a documented process map paper that shows here is how the process is done. So this is the what we do. This is the what's going to happen when we do these things. And we do a lot of that with Sharper's process mapping. So what we do, the second thing we're going to do is now we create a procedure. The procedure is how it gets done. So this is what, this is how. So it would be like today, it's very snowy outside. We would create a process map that says, here is what needs to be done when you shovel the driveway, right? So you know, step 1 of the process map, get the shovel. Step 2, put your gloves on. Step 3, shovel. Step 4, sweep it off. Step 5, put the shovel away. Step 6, come back inside, right? So that would be the process map. The procedure would be, now here is the video training showing you how I want the driveway shovel. I feel like we should have had these when we were kids. This sounds like something Dad would have had. You know, he's like, here's the actual video of what I want done, which would be all the nuance. It would be like, I want you to use this shovel and I want you to brush it this way and start from the top and go to the bottom and all of the tactical side of it. That's the procedure. The policy is, and it should take you an hour. So all 3 of those steps are created, documented. I always say it the same way. They're not all in some random Google Drive somewhere. They're in one place. Everybody knows how to get to them. So the solution we have for Sharper, which is we process map, we use Trainual, and then we use something like maybe like Asana to assign times. And now here's when it's going to get done, and here's how it's going to happen. When you have all 3 layers, then we can create process indicators. We can create training materials. We can give people replicatable things to do so that we can scale up as a company. So critical.
It's amazing how many of these things like overlap. So you go to like inspiration and like the procedure side. So you have somebody who's doing the process, but isn't doing it through the procedure.
Right.
And that affects culture.
Correct.
Because like they maybe have the right outcome, but they're not doing it the right way.
Right.
And now that affects like the workplace, because then like this person's not doing something properly. And then they're going to say, well, I had the result. Yeah, but the result is obviously good,
Correct.
but if you're not doing it the right way, like you're hurting other areas.
Right. The ends don't justify the means.
Yeah.
I mean, this is Austin's quote he's used for years now, which is culture just simply means it's the way things are done around here.
Mhm.
And I always say this to teams when we sit there. I say to them, look, we are going to have to create today. We're deciding today that we are going to have a company culture of following systems and processes. You haven't had that in the past. We scored this low. If you're hiring us to come in here and do this, you're hiring us because you want us to lay down the law on you on this, which is we are going to become a company of process, procedures, and policies. If we're not going to be a company of process, procedures, and policies, then what are we doing here today? Like, let's just skip it. So very, very important. The next component, again, which ties all together, is I always go in and ask somebody if they have structured meetings, assigned times where tasks are assigned and progress is measured. It's the same thing every time, which is, do you have a meeting cadence when things take place? Is there a weekly meeting where organizational things are taking place? Is there a monthly meeting where profits are reviewed? Is there a quarterly meeting where purpose is reviewed? And is there daily meetings where process is reviewed? So if you take, again, this is where this all starts tying together. If you take a good process ownership chart, I can start at the top and I can say, here is our owner and he's going to measure purpose once a quarter. And here are our leaders and they're going to measure profit once a month. And here's our managers and they're going to measure performance once a week. And here is our team and they're going to measure process every single day. And so now my meeting structure mirrors my expectation of the business, which is daily check-ins, weekly performance, monthly profit, quarterly purpose. So that meeting cadence is important. It's critical because if you don't have it, then we're putting emphasis on the wrong things. Because the thing that really matters is every day that everybody's doing their job. And then what matters is that work led to some performance and that performance leads to the profit and that the profit leads to the purpose. If we don't have that run, then the meetings just turn into everybody kind of sitting around shooting the breeze. There's no purpose to it. So it's really critical.
It's amazing how like those things like drive both ways. Because like the process is like encouraged by the purpose. So like the process, people want to do the process because of the purpose, but the purpose doesn't get accomplished if the process isn't done. Right. It's very important on both sides of it.
Yeah, for sure. Third thing I always ask them is we have key numbers that we measure on a daily, weekly, monthly basis. Again, every time I do this, I feel bad because I know where we're going, in a consult, and I know that we're going to end up with like this very clearly defined, this is what's going to be, and this is the law. And so they'll rank it high, and then I feel bad for them because it's like, then we'll get into it and realize that's not what they're doing at the moment. Nobody is. I mean, honestly, I very rarely, maybe 1 out of 100, where you would walk in and they would have a clear measurables of what's actually supposed to be measured in a business, which is daily, weekly, monthly numbers that we're tracking on a regular basis, that we're using stoplight reports properly, that measurables are being tracked on a regular basis. So that numbers thing, I mean, we've been pounding on this now for the last few months now with even in the stuff we're doing, which is looking at our numbers in a very granular perspective. I find that the more successful a company is, the more ridiculous they are about their numbers. I mean, the teams that you would go through, like the teams like the Ryan Pinedas of the world, we have a client in San Diego named Phil Green. Phil's a great client. Those clients that you would look at, T and Home Buyers in Tennessee, like these teams that are running big, adept organizations, they sweat it over the smallest of numbers. Like the minutia is where they make their money. And a lot of times I'll go sit with a team and all they look at is profit. Like, what's the profit number? And for them, they're going all the way down to literally, how many calls did we make to phone numbers that had this area code? I mean, just crazy stuff that you would think there's no way that number matters, but they know every lever because they're pulling the right numbers. Super important. Last part we look at when we look at systems is we look at all those things. We got to know measurables. We got to know meeting structure. We got to know whether or not all that's taking place. And then I got to know if everybody in the company would understand the business's pipeline. And again, this one's a bit subjective, but it's really not. I always say it this way. If I pulled in anybody from the company right now and had them come in the room and explain to me how we get from lead to referral, Could they explain to me that entire customer's journey? Could they walk me through the entire company pipeline? We use a tool called the SIPOC. Could they walk me through a SIPOC of how we work as a business? Even if they didn't understand the term, could they show it to me? And it surprises me a bit sometimes how often they're just very candid and honest with it, and they'll rank it very low and say, yeah, you know what? My department understands my department. They really don't understand how it affects the next person in line, which again ties all together, right? Company culture. If you're not thinking about how it affects the next person in line, you make short-sighted decisions. The next guy suffers for your bad decision. When you understand the whole pipeline, all of a sudden, we're in a much healthier place as a business. And so very, very telling often is a lot of times they're just very candid with it and say, yeah, no, nobody in my department would know what he does or what she does. And when they do understand it, I mean, I was in a meeting a few months ago with a very large team, and it was almost like a counseling session. It was almost like therapy for them, of like the salesperson explaining their process, and the operations person had much more empathy towards what they go through on a daily basis by just understanding what they do. So critical to the business for sure. Last part of the assessment we always look at, which is the engagement side. And so this is where we get into the branding, marketing, advertising, and sales, which is the fun stuff, right? We've been talking about this a lot lately with our teams, which is all the stuff we just went through: resource, inspiration, systems. You have to earn the right to go to engagement. Because if you don't have those three components in place and you try to go, what I always say is dump the gas on the fire, it's going to explode. You take a car, you just don't put it together. I mean, my first car, your first car, right? Pieces of junk, right? They weren't great vehicles. If you don't get the car working properly and you go to pour gas in it, it's not going anywhere. Same thing. Marketing, sales, branding, advertising are the gas. You have to have enough to keep the car going, right? You can't have nothing. But to actually just dedicate yourself to it, you got to get this fixed first. So when we get there, we ask 4 questions that kind of cover those 4 things. So I always ask to start first with, do we have a brand guide, logo, consistent digital presence that keeps us top of mind with our customers? Simple question, but a lot of them struggle with it, which is to say, and I'll explain it. If I pulled open your website and your Facebook and your Instagram and your TikTok, and we laid out all of the graphics for the company, if we put them all on a table right now together, we printed everything off, would it look like it came from the same company? And usually they put their head down, right? They're like, no, not really. Right? I mean, we've seen this before a lot. And I explained to them, NASA's brand guide is like this thick. It's giant, and it's NASA. It should be really simple how you use it. But they're so dedicated to that brand, which is why people will wear t-shirts that say NASA free of charge. So those brand questions, a lot of times it kind of catch them off guard. Like, I'm not really sure how we do for that. So the branding side. Second thing I always ask them is marketing, which is messaging. Like, what do you sound like as a company? What's the voice of the company? What's the tense of the company? And I always explain it this way, which is, if we had the voice on every platform, every person who talks on the phone, text messages we send, person who answers, calls a customer up, all of it, would it sound like the same person? I mean, if you go to one of any Chick-fil-A in the country, they're almost vanilla because they're exactly the same, right? They're going to say, if you went through there and they didn't say "my pleasure" in the drive-thru, you'd be thrown off.
Oh yeah.
If you pulled through there and I did this the other day, I went to one in an airport and they didn't hand me a foam cup. Right? It was a paper cup in an airport. I'm like, this is a ripoff. Yeah. Because it's a bit of a disconnect from the messaging you're used to having. That's what we want to see. And they usually rank it pretty low. A lot of times marketing is kind of the last thing that's thought about. Third component I always ask them is, do we have effective advertising channels that are measured on a weekly basis and adjusted when proven ineffective? So in other words, here's all my advertising channels. I'm buying ads, I'm doing mail, I'm sending out text messages. Do we track those things on a weekly basis? And is there adjustments ever made to them? And a lot of times they're like, we do, but not weekly. When you think about that, how much money you're wasting by not adjusting those things on a regular basis. I mean, I've got a client now where they're down to, if they're running a big campaign, they're adjusting hourly. Like it's quick changes. They got to make moves now. They don't have time to wait that long. And so especially in the digital environments, a week is too long. You got to shorten up that window. The last thing I always ask them, which always takes more clarity, which is, do we have an effective sales process? We have a replicatable pattern to convert a lead into a paying customer. And I always have to clarify it, because everybody always says the same thing is, oh, our salespeople are incredible, rock stars. And I always say the same thing is, not that we're good at sales, but that we have a process whereby we can sell. Those are two very different things, because if it's just I have really good salespeople, then I'm at their mercy. If I have a process to sell somebody, then I can interchange them a bit. Now, again, a talented salesperson is always going to outperform a non-talented salesperson. But especially when the market shifted a while back, I mean, we saw this happen in dramatic fashion, which is people who had really good salespeople started suffering. And the people who had process could adjust process. I can't adjust your talent. I can adjust a process. So really understanding that sales process is critical to how we run as a company. So by the time we get done with that assessment, I mean, we've squeezed them out, right? I mean, we run them through the ringer. And a lot of times, I mean, you'll just kind of look around the table and everybody looks pretty beat up, or they're fully confident. Like they're very confident in themselves. My favorite one I ever did was I did this assessment, and there was about 20 people. I was in New York. There's about 20 people, and we go around the table and we go around. Everybody's just ranking this thing in the toilet. 1, 1, 1, 1, 1. And I get to this kid who's sitting next to me, and he's like 3. I'm like, great. Go around, do it again, because I always make everybody answer. And then tell me what you scored the lowest. Next session. 1, 1, 1, 1, 1. 3. He did it about the third time. I looked at him, and I'm just like, how long have you worked here? And he just looks at me. He's like, I started yesterday. And I'm like, yes, you did, right? That makes sense, right? Don't destroy the company on day one. Be good today, say all the nice things that you need to say so that, you don't hurt the boss's feelings. But when you can get candid, honest feedback on this stuff, it's so powerful. The way I always end it with our teams is I'll sit there and I'll say it, because it's usually leadership teams. And I'll say, look, we just ranked all of this, and I always run the math off of it. And we're at a 72%. Based on the leadership of this business, we're running at about a 72% efficiency. And our perception is this company's reality. If we think we're at 72%, then that's where we're at, because everybody around us is just as confused, if not more, than we are. So if we're ranking low, that's where we're at. The confidence that always comes back to it, which is if you're in business and you're at the place where consultants are coming in to help your company, it means that there's a certain level of talent in the business. There just is. I mean, I don't know how else to explain it. I don't know how else to quantify it. There's some people who can just make money and some people who can't. And so I always explain to them is, look, there's a level of talent here. If we could get the process and the things we just went through to match up with the talent, then we got something. There's an old picture. I usually have the picture in my deck, and I put it up on the screen. And it's Jim Thorpe in the Olympics. And Jim Thorpe's there, and he's got these 2 different shoes on. One's a dress shoe. One is another shoe that doesn't fit his foot. And he found him in a garbage can. So right before he ran the race, somebody stole his shoes. So literally, this isn't, then you can look it up. There's a picture. It's a true story. Ran the decathlon with 2 shoes he found in a garbage can. One of them was not even the right size, and he won a gold medal. It's incredible. Like, that's a guy who was an incredible athlete. He was like a 5-sport professional athlete. Crazy. Incredibly talented. And you see that question, you're like, wow, how gifted is he? I always ask the same question. Why couldn't we have got the guy some cleats? And that's how I feel about business, which is, here's these incredibly talented people usually running on shoes we found in a garbage can, which is our process. If we could put those 2 things together, how much better? Because what ends up happening is we don't use the talent to grow the business. We use the talent to overcome inefficiencies. And that's not a good thing to be doing. I want to remove all inefficiency so that when we bring the talent to the table, they're using that to multiply our efforts. I mean, we use this statistic all the time, which is that if you can put the right person in the right seat, optimize talent for the seat, you should expect a 34% higher performance than if you don't put the right person in the right seat. And what that looks like is we have done our job as business owners, we've done our job as entrepreneurs, filling all 4 of those quadrants with 3s, so that when we bring the talent to the table, we're handing them a sharp knife, sharp cleats to go run the race in, and now all of a sudden, that's the difference between you and your competitor. I find it every business I go to, they have similar profiles for PI, they have similar experience in their people, the resumes are almost identical. I mean, you could literally take one of the 100 teams I was with this last year, and they almost look the same. There's not much difference. The variables of success are, did you provide them with the right resources? Do these people want to work here? Are they inspired to work here? What kind of tools are you handing them? What's the system? And then what's the branding, market, advertising, sales that makes their job easier? From that, we can build off of something. And you find that everything gets easier when the systems are all lined up. But it's got to start with an honest look of these things. I always find that either a team is too hard on themselves or they're delusional, right? And we've got to find what the truth is so that we can build off of that.